Good morning. Sorry. I forgot to actually turn the headset on. Is it working? Good morning, everyone from San Francisco. It's 8:30 a.m. It was a long day yesterday with the Pro Chess League finals. I forgot to turn on the headset, so I started talking. Nobody could hear anything. But we have people in the chat saying sound is good. From V Miles, from Greg, Barman, random name, call Seb. Everyone confirming that sound is doing just okay. We have the final round of the Grenke Chess Classic. Um, in the lead, Fabiano Caruana. This tournament started just days after his candidate's victory, and he's looking to win yet another tournament. And thank you to Thugso for the resub, 3-month resub. Distant Fire is in the house. So is Rufus and Nils. We got a good crowd. So this is the situation going into the last round. We have Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces against Viswanathan Anand, and he needs to win. If Magnus doesn't win, he doesn't even have theoretical chances at um, at making the tiebreak, and that is because he's just half a point behind Caruana. But if Caruana were to lose, then Vityugov, who is Caruana's opponent today, would manage to uh, surpass Caruana as well as Magnus if Magnus were to make a draw. So it's Caruana in the lead, and he's being chased by Carlsen and Vityugov. And that means because the number one and number three, let's call Vityugov number three, because they are playing each other, Magnus needs to win, and there's no theoretical chance of a draw being enough. So that's the situation. With the black pieces, Magnus needs a win, and he's been playing like it. His The way Magnus has coped with this black game has been pretty special, I guess we could say. He's taking big chances uh, in order to get a unclear position and fight for a win in the tournament. And we can just look at his pawn structure to see that he's doing some extraordinary things. He has an isolated pawn on h5. He has a doubled isolated pawns on the f file. There's another isolated pawn in the center, and then there's these pretty aggressive pawns on the queen side. And that's also where he has his king. So Magnus is really going all out in this game, trying to get a tie for first place. And if there's a tie for first place, there will be a tiebreak match. So that's very exciting. I think, first of all, we got to figure out how these games are going to end. Because I need to check out of my hotel room in 3.5 hours. Which means if the tiebreak is in more than 3.5 hours, I'm gonna feel a little bit upset, but there's really nothing to do about it. Speaking of which, why am I sitting in my hotel room? Yes, it's because I'm in San Francisco for the Pro Chess League finals, which finished yesterday. Armenia, Who saw that coming? I did not. Hikaru called it before the final started, and I was going up to him and saying, "Were you making a joke? Were you just saying something crazy so that if by some miracle it actually happened, you would look like a total genius?" And Hikaru was like, "No, no, I really believe that the Armenians would be very tough in the final, and that they would get a tiebreak, and that they would win the tiebreak." So that was a very impressive call on Hikaru's part, and Armenia are the champions. Um, I'm kind of feeling good about it because Armenia is from the Eastern Division. It's the same division as the Norway Gnomes, and yeah, two two seasons in a row, the representative of the Eastern Division, which is basically India and Eastern Europe, um, has made it to the finals. And we lost the final last year, and now Armenia won. So it's Eastern Division is really representing on the world stage. I'm gonna start going back in order to see how Magnus ended up in this situation. I'm just gonna take a brief look at the Vityugov Caruana game. This game is pretty important, seeing as how if Caruana wins, he wins the tournament, and then we don't need to bother ourselves with possible tiebreaks and whatnot. If Caruana wins, he will be the Grenke champion just days after he managed to win the candidates tournament. And I have no words for how impressive that performance would be, managing to win this tournament just days after your most important tournament victory. The candidates is a long tournament, it's 3 weeks of competition, so much on stake, and Karana playing a new tournament just days after that. I thought it was silly, to be honest. I thought, but I was wrong. I was wrong. The guy is on form. The guy is winning. Why shouldn't you play when you're winning? I guess the answer to that is because you didn't know you were going to win when you scheduled the Grenke tournament. But he scheduled it, and it's working out very well for him. Chess Bay, do you want to be embedded? Yes. Yes, I'll take a Chess.com TV embed. Random name says he is informed now, but will he be in 6 months? Who knows? Yeah, no, I understand that the World Championship match is gonna be the most important. But the thing is, you gotta remember that for Magnus, the World Championship match is the most important. For the rest of the players in the candidates tournament, honestly, the candidates tournament is more important because if you don't win the candidates tournament, um, you don't even get to think about the world championship. And also, frankly, the candidates tournament is more difficult to win than the world championship. And it sounds a bit strange, but it's true. In the world championship, you have one opponent. It's a really good opponent, but it's just one guy. Whereas in the candidates tournament, we had 8 potential winners. Basically, every participant had shown that at their best, they are capable of winning this tournament. So, yeah, candidates tournament was really important. And yes, now the highlight is the World Championship match, but for Caruana, he has already played the most important event of the year and succeeded there. And now he's taking on yet another one as a reward. Uh, Isolda Perpetual Stalemate is in the chat. Fabi played the Petra again, says Distant Fire. Yeah, that is true. Fabiano has been having a lot of success with the Petrov, and this is another Petrov. And to be honest, I quite like Black's position. I think Black is doing pretty okay. I really like this pawn formation. We see the pawn chain up the board, and especially the furthest one, this pawn on d4, is a really good pawn, restricting the opponent's pieces and also giving a very nice square on d5 for the bishop. And white has some kind of thing going on here with the bishop, with the queen toward the e6 pawn. But I don't really see that going anywhere. I don't see that going anywhere. And unless this is going to have some kind of effect on the game, you're just placing your pieces in silly places. And also the bishop on d2, d1, no, c1. It's not really doing much, right? And it's undeveloped, and I don't have any good news for this bishop. It's being restricted by the pawn on d4, but it's also being restricted by white's own pawn on f4. So to me, this actually looks like Fabiano, once again with the Petrov, has a good position with black. And if he's able to do something with this, he's going to win the tournament. Okay, yes, there's an important move in this position, and that is knight to e4. So the last move is threatening knight to e4. You cannot take this because of the bishop takes e6 tactics. So how to defend against knight e4? Knight f5 would be my suggestion. Blocking the bishop. Maybe you can even go further into e3. I really think Caruana has a nice position. I really like what black is doing. And I don't understand what white is doing. To me, it just seems like black is much better, and we're just at move 20. So it's been a very successful opening for Caruana. Jackie asks, how was the meeting with your old grade school teacher? I didn't find her. Unfortunately, I had been looking at the wrong website. I had Googled her name and the name of the school and found a web page that said she still worked there. But unfortunately, that web page was out of date. And also, the school was closed for spring break, so I didn't even get to go in and take a look around. Greg says Fabi's second was interviewed on the Chess24 coverage and noted that the Petrov let him avoid both the Berlin and Italian to get play. Yeah, I don't know. Rustam Kazimdzhanov, who is Fabiano's second, he must be the only person in the world who thinks that the Petrov is the combative opening to avoid the Italian. That sounds like it doesn't sound like the common opinion of most people. Chess Bay is going down memory lane. Grenke 3 years ago, or maybe 4. It was one of my favorite tournaments because Neidich and Carlsen were tied in the end and had to play tiebreaks, and it went all the way to Armageddon. Yeah, I remember that because we were doing coverage for Norwegian television, and it was one of the most successful broadcasts we've ever had, because people were going crazy about this tiebreak, and especially since Naiditsch was holding his own. It wasn't just like Magnus was crushing in the tiebreaks. He got into trouble a couple of games, and it went all the way to Armageddon. Yusevich, hello everyone. Hello back to you. Yeah. So I actually think that Caruana is doing very well. I think he has good chances to win this game and then actually win the tournament outright. But we're gonna revert back to the Carlsen game to see how Magnus ended up with these not very good looking pawns. So we're gonna go straight. Actually, we're gonna go to move one. We're going to go to move one because we got to notice that Magnus Carlsen played the Sicilian, and that is not his most common opening. So from move one, it was very clear that he wanted to win this game against Anand. With the black pieces, he didn't care. He was going for it. Ah, title is wrong. Still streaming under IRL. Thank you. Yeah, I tried to stream from my cell phone at the Foundry yesterday. It did not work out very well. But the thing is that Anna did the same thing a couple of hours later, and she managed. She had a very nice stream for more than half an hour. So I'm just, yeah, I really don't understand what went wrong for me, compared to how she did. Okay, let's go here. What are we gonna call this? We're gonna call it a decisive. No, we're gonna say hammer time in San Francisco. And then we're gonna say decisive round from Grenke Chess. Anand Carlsen. That's gonna do it. Uh, and then change the category to chess. Thank you, whoever that was. I'm gonna need to find the chat because I missed who it was. Updated, and then I go back to chat. Thank you, Bjarte Pedersen, for the resub. Okay, I fixed it. Can Chessbay confirm that I have corrected my title? And we're going to talk more about the Sicilian. So Magnus went for, normally actually when Magnus plays the Sicilian, he goes for the Najdorf. And he played d6 now as well, which basically signifies the Najdorf, because if you go a6, that's the most popular Sicilian opening. But instead, Magnus went knight c6, which is the classical Sicilian. And one of the key features of this classical Sicilian is that you very often get the doubled pawns on the f file. And that's what happened here as well. Still categorized as IRL. Hmm, that's annoying because I updated the information. It didn't save. Okay, one more time. Okay. Bishop g5, e6. Thank you to Stormbixed for resubbing. 2-month resub. The title is changed to, says Tom Andy. Excellent. That is what I was trying to do. Queen d2 by Anand. Now a6. Castles bishop d7. f3. So this is kind of whenever white goes f3 in the Sicilian, they often call it the English attack. So the pawn is reinforcing its buddy on e4, and it's also actually helping white go g4, g5 in the future. And one of the common ways of playing this, thank you to Space Otter, Space Otter with the resub, thank you. Hola, Amer, says Megit. F3. So next, Anand is actually going to go back with the bishop because he wants to use this g5 square with the pawn. But Magnus makes an interesting, very interesting decision to go knight takes d4. And then queen takes back bishop e7. He's basically saying that I would like your queen to be on d4 because I think it's misplaced. Maybe Anand in the future was going to play the knight back and then up to d4. Maybe he was going to play the bishop up to d4. But Magnus makes the early exchange and puts the white queen on d4. King b1, b5, and at this moment, Anand decides that he wants to give Magnus what is the standard structure in these situations. So he chooses to take on f6. And if you take back with the bishop, then queen takes d6, and you lost a pawn for pretty much no good reason. You get the bishop pair, but you're a pawn down. So that's not going to be very good. Instead, Magnus goes g takes f6. And that's how we get this pawn mass, I guess is the correct description, which is very, very well known in the classical Sicilian. Very often in these lines with knight c6 and bishop g5, you get this pawn structure. And it's pretty. You cannot really decide the game early, which I think is why Magnus went for this. Because now there's going to be a fight. There's a big imbalance on the board, and and there's no easy way of breaking it down. It doesn't look too good. Um, that I will agree with. But it's combative. Does Hammer have YouTube? Asks Megit. Yes, I do have YouTube, and now I also have these panels. So if you scroll down below the stream, you can see a link to my YouTube channel. And on my YouTube channel, I'm posting my streams with a 3-week delay. So all my streams this year, or rather since March. You can find on my YouTube channel. Perpetual stalemate. Can you please say your name? There was a big debate yesterday about the correct way to pronounce it. Yoon. Groger with the Yoon. No, the story goes that my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Muller, the very same one I wanted to meet during this week, um, when she was presented with my name, she was trying to decide what the class would call me. And so she really early on she decided that Ludwig in the U.S. was never gonna work. So she decided I was just gonna be John. But I don't call myself John. Um, that's not the Norwegian way of pronouncing it. And so she listened to me pronounce Jon Ludvig, and she decided that okay, it's Yoon like moon. So thanks to Mrs. Muller, I I I relayed this message to other people. One of which was Alexandra, and so I said Yoon like moon is the way that it's been going around. Uh, so yeah, she, yeah, Alexandra actually made a very funny video on YouTube with a remix of me trying to say my name and her trying to say my name. Yeah, it's more Yoon than Yoon, but I'm not sure Americans can do that. I don't know. So it's Jon Ludvig. Jon Ludvig. You can watch Alexandra's YouTube video to get the you can just put it in a loop and you're going to have me pronounce my name for eternity. Exotic, says Tom Andy. Yoon Ludwig. Yeah, I agree. Um, actually, I'm not the only person in Norway named Jon Ludvig. There's one other guy, and he's a very talented musician. So I have a problem with a couple of times on different social medias if I'm late joining. The username Jon Ludvig is has been taken by this guy. His name is Jon Ludvig Hansen. So at the very least, I win the last name discussion. I think Hammer is a better last name than Hansen. But that's just me. Bob asks, "Are you playing Blitz tomorrow in the Oslo Chess Club?" No, tomorrow, while you're playing Blitz, um, I'm actually not on a plane. I'm having lunch. Hammer is an epic name, says Isolda. Hammer time. Yes, so let's do a couple of those. That's my favorite emote, the hammer time. Kayand says, "Are you playing football this season? I remember you're a mean tackler." Uh, yeah, no, I did have some good games last year. Um, but I'm actually having some problems with my Achilles, and so I haven't been playing this year, and I need to go see the doctor because I have some kind of belastningsskade. I'm not sure how to say it in English. Kind of an injury due to training more than your body can keep up with, or training more aggressively than what you should, seeing as how you don't train very often. I have no idea what amalgamation means, avalanche. But that seems like a word people should look up. Overtraining, says Euclid. Yeah, that's a easy word. Mas1 says, stop exercising, drink more beer. No, that's the thing, right? Because I almost didn't do any training the last 4 or 5 months because I was told that you should take it easy during the off season with this injury. So I took it very easy, and it hasn't really helped. Uh, Cam Arndt asks, why did you move to the US when you were young? We stayed for a year in the US. My dad had a sabbatical. He's a professor of economics. And he had this 1 year where he didn't have to teach in Oslo. And so the entire family moved to Berkeley. And he was doing some stuff at UC Berkeley. And it was just, I guess it was an adventure of sorts. Perpetual stalemate. I had no idea chess could lead to heel injury. Yeah, no, I really think it was the soccer that got the best of my foot. Uh, I'm not sure the chess playing part of my spare time affected that. Anyway, we're supposed to get up to date with this Carlsen game. So we got this interesting pawn structure with the pawn mass. And then knight e2 from Anand. He's actually trying to go here, I think. He's trying to get the knight over to uh, h5. Rook c1, queen back. So now he can go either knight d4 or knight f4. After queen b6, Anand decides f4 is the best one because sometimes in these variations, black places the queen on e5, and it's just such a powerful piece and very difficult to kick away. So the knight gets an option maybe to go to d3, maybe to go to h5. And that latter option is ruled out by Magnus because he plays h5 himself, which means this square is now protected by the rook, and the knight can say bye bye to ever getting there. G3, rook c2 from Magnus, bishop d3. And now comes a very interesting sequence. Magnus is pretty happy with the queen in this diagonal, his rook on the half-open file. I would maybe consider going h4, but Magnus is just saying, how can I improve my position? I'm going to go king d8. Okay, it looks like a kind of strange move. Anand goes c3, Magnus goes king c8. He's just taking a walk with the king. There's not that much Anand can do in the meantime. Bishop c2, king b8. And now in some lines, Magnus gets the option of going rook to c8 and exerting more pressure on the c file. In order for the c file to be effective for his rooks, he needs to remove the pawn on c3. And in order to do that, he's going to have to go with the minority attack. So he's actually going to have to try to do something with the pawns in front of the king. So the king doesn't really have a lot of pawn cover, but it has plenty of other pieces nearby, as well as I guess white is having big difficulties getting any of his pieces close to black's king. So it's an unorthodox pawn structure, but it's working okay for now. Um, so Anand goes a3, and I really think that this is just about trying to stop Magnus from going b4. So Magnus tries a5, then rook b7. So we see both of these moves are preparations for going b4. But he gets stopped in his tracks because Anand goes knight d3. So we see the knight is doing a good defensive job, covering the b4 square, but it's not clear how Anand is going to make any progress. Magnus goes bishop c6, rook e1, rook d8, and now f5. And this is a very classical way of playing these positions, that white tries to attack these pawns, and especially the pawn on e6. But in order to attack the pawn on e6, you're going to have to remove the pawn on f7, defending the pawn on e6. And the way you do that is that you go f5 and then you take on e6. So you need to exchange off a pair of pawns here to make the e6 pawn a target. And Magnus is saying, I'm not having any of that. He just went d5. He's opening up the position, but in doing so, he's giving himself these really strange pawns. The isolated pawns on the edge and in the center. He has the isolated doubled pawns on the f-file, and he's just saying that my activity is going to outweigh my pawn weaknesses, and the fact that I have the bishop pair is going to be just as important as having good looking pawns. Hi to Ron, hi to Halvar, and my sympathies to Halvar, because this weekend he was playing the qualifying for the Norwegian top league, and his team was very close to qualifying, but they finished third when just the top two teams qualified. Distant Fire in the chat. Did anyone see the Hammer Shahada video yet? I'm hoping the answer to that is no. I played a blitz game with Greg during the weekend. My trash talking game was very, very, very good. My chess playing skills were also very, very good up until making one incredibly poor decision. Instead of going a pawn up in a position I had no chance of losing, I went into something else, which just killed me basically on the spot. So if you have seen, or if you haven't seen the Shahada Hammer video, maybe Distant Fire or Chess Bay can link to it. But if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend that you only watch the 4 or 5 first minutes, because then my trash talking game was on point and my moves were also good. And then the last minute of the video, things go downhill very quickly. Kayand says that I considered challenging you to a blindfold game during our soccer match 2 seasons ago, but I was too shy. So we played soccer against each other, and based on earlier comments, I made some strong tackles. I try to tackle fairly, but sometimes I'm not that good, which is why I sometimes have some bad tackles. But yeah, that happens. Distant Fire asks, did you play 10 games, won 9, and Greg posted the one you lost? No, actually, I wish that was true. I wish that was true. We played 1 game and I lost that 1 game. And then I played, I think, a couple of international masters who were also hanging around the chessboard, and I won 4 games in a row. So yeah, I just had a very bad minute in that game against Greg. I don't think Jennifer came by, Isolde. Yeah, So let's go back to the Carlsen game. Let's try not to be distracted by everything that happened this weekend, although I can easily understand why that's happening. It was a good weekend. Uh, King A1 from Anand. Uh, that's one of those cryptic moves I struggle with. Bishop F8. I guess that's just taking the bishop away from some kind of possible being threatened by the rook in some variations. King C1, King A7, Bishop A2, Rook C7. I mean, at any of these opportunities, I would be pretty tempted to playing D4 because as we were talking uh, uh, about, this pawn on c3 needs to be taken out in order for the rooks to gain their prominence on these two files and also to give the bishop more ways of attacking the white king. But Magnus is holding back on this d4 move until this moment when Anand plays knight e1, and now this knight is coming to c2 and from c2 to d4. So Anand is trying to block the d pawn in its tracks, and that is when Magnus decides it's time to take action. He goes d4. It's not a pawn sacrifice because if you take on d4, then rook takes c1. You need to take back, and regardless which piece you use to take back, you can take on d4. Actually, thinking about it, it is a pawn sacrifice because the pawn on f7 is hanging. But I think the justification is just that the bishop pair on the open board is so powerful. Something like queen g1, these pawns are under attack, and also there's going to be some stuff going on with the black bishop coming into the fray, creating dangerous attacking opportunities against the king on a1. So I think that was Magnus's plan. Okay, that was a weird jump, but the moment we're at is d4. And now after knight c2 from Anand, that may have been a surprising move for Magnus. So Anand says, I want this pawn, but I want to take it with the knight. After knight c2, Magnus goes d3. And now this pawn is in trouble because knight d4 is played, and now threatening queen takes d3. Queen takes d3. What to do about that? Magnus goes bishop c5. But I guess I'm not a huge fan of that move because if you have to give up your bishop in order to get the pawn back, say in the variation queen takes d3, takes back, rook takes c1, takes back, rook takes d4. Now this would be a very interesting position if you still had the black squared bishop. But when you don't have that bishop, I think something like just queen e3, and now it's really difficult to defend this pawn on f7. The black queen isn't really gonna come make some threats against the white king. This looks pleasantly better for white. Yeah, I think so. So what is going to happen? Actually, after takes, maybe there's an option of playing rook takes d4. Rook takes d4. Very similar, but you avoid the immediate exchange of the rooks on the c-file. And after queen e3, trying to mimic the line we had earlier, then black can go rook takes d1. Take, take with the rook. Black has the more active king. Black has the opportunity to go pawn hunting with rook c2. This is probably fine for black, but I doubt that he's better. Thank you to Kisakil. Kisakil with the 3-month resub. Thank you. Booyah, he says. Let's give you some booyah emotes for that comment. The booyah is maybe not so visible, but we're going to put it out there. Okay, so chess coding is saying that the game has continued after bishop c5. Queen takes d3, bishop takes d4, takes back, rook takes d4. Okay, so we got this line we were considering. Queen takes d4 is very bad on account of rook takes c1. So you need to move the queen. I suggested queen e3. Anand decides that if I go queen e3, then the queens will be exchanged and black gets a more active king. So he's keeping the queens on the board. I guess he's trying to say that keeping the queens on the board is a problem for black because of the king situation and the king not having pawns pretty close by to protect it. Queen e2, Magnus exchanges on c1, takes back, and then b4. b4 makes a lot of sense, trying to open up the position around the white king. And maybe you're even threatening to play b3, locking the bishop out of play. But on the other hand, in this position, what happens if you take on f7? It's greedy, it's very greedy. But you always gotta make sure that your opponent can't steal a pawn off of you. Actually, this pawn on h5 is also hanging, but that's less appetizing. Because if you take on h5, then you take on a3, takes back, rook d2. And there's a huge double threat of queen b2 and queen d4. But as I'm saying this, I notice that you can play queen c5. And here we see the problem with the black king not having a lot of pawns helping out, is that the king is prone to being caught in some tactics. In this case, the tactics is the fact that white gobbles a pawn and then manages to get the queens off the board. So maybe this is good for white. Is there any other moves? Maybe you can go b3, kicking the bishop back, and then go rook d2. And yes, there's still the opportunity of queen c5, but this time the pawn on f7 is not hanging, and the bishop is basically blocking the way for the king. So the king is really, in this position, really stuck on a1. Going into an endgame could be a problem for white, since the king is so poor on a1. Kisakil asks, what kind of match is this? this is the final round of the Grenke Chess Classics in Germany. Caruana is in the lead. Caruana has a half a point advantage on Carlsen, and that means Carlsen needs to win this game. The only way for Carlsen to win the tournament is to win this game and hope that Caruana does not win his game. Okay, rook takes and then b4. So Anand is going to have to think a little bit about this. No, Anand doesn't think for a very long time. He just grabs that pawn on f7. Interesting. Normally, I would think that you spend some time trying to figure out whether this is safe or not. But Anand is just going for it. And to be honest, I don't see what's wrong with this move. To me, this does look like a nice way of getting a pawn up. Yeah, so to me this looks actually pretty good for Anand. Perpetual Stalemate reports from the Caruana game that Caruana is about equal with Black. Okay, we're gonna go back to that game. I was looking at this position earlier, saying that I preferred, well, basically much preferred Fabiano's position with the black pieces. Let's see what happened. Knight d2, knight f5, c4. That's a grandmaster move. But to be honest, I thought about this move, and I also thought that Caruana maybe could just move the bishop back. Because you had the option maybe of going knight e3 in the future. Okay, but Caruana decides to take on on c3, takes back, so he lost one of his most valuable assets, the pawn on d4. Centralizing the rook, some exchanges, rook e1, b5. Black is trying to establish a passed pawn on the queen side. Knight e4, queen e7, knight g5. I guess you're gonna go h6, right? Let's see, queen e7, knight g5, h6. Yeah, to me it still looks like Fabiano has the better of it. To me it looks like Fabiano is pleasantly better. He's going to make a passed pawn on b4, and the white pieces are very clumsy, unable to achieve anything on the king side. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that Fabiano still has a big advantage with the black pieces. So he might be able to decide this tournament on his own, regardless of the result in Carlsen's game. Bob Sakamanu asks, do you know what the tiebreak situation is? Yes, I do, because in the Grenke they have had a very nice tradition of having tiebreak matches. So basically, if somebody finishes on the same amount of points, there's going to be a tiebreak match. Cool Bear is in the house, and so is Atomic Player. Okay, we're gonna go back to the Carlsen game. Anand has just grabbed a pawn on f7. Magnus goes h4. I guess that's mainly about making sure the bishop doesn't take yet another pawn. And then Anand goes queen e3, and Magnus going for the queen exchange. With a pawn down, he's playing rook d7, offering the exchange of queens. I guess he's saying that even with a pawn down, my position is pretty good because my king is so much better than your king. But surely winning this game is going to be incredibly hard. Okay, let's try to analyze. Takes, takes, and then move this bishop. I guess Magnus is intending rook d2, after which this pawn is impossible to defend. The pawn is actually impossible to defend, so white should take on h4, take back, and then this pawn on h4 is impossible to defend. Okay, so Magnus has things under control, I think. I think probably because of his more active king, Magnus is better going into the endgame, even though he's initially going to be a pawn down. Okay, and all of this was played. Rook d7, queen takes, takes back with the king, and bishop e6. Interesting. Interesting. And I'll tell you what else is interesting. How about the move rook to d6? Okay, Magnus has played rook d7, so that point becomes moot. But what about rook d6? And if f5 protecting the bishop, then I wanted to go h3. Really trying to keep this h pawn and then go after the h2 pawn. Because if you get this pawn on h2 with a passed pawn on the h-file, that's going to win the game. So rook d6, I would say, was an interesting choice. Magnus went rook d2 instead. And now with this pawn, yeah, that pawn is not going to survive. So Anand is going to have to take on h4. Actually, maybe he's going to first take on b4. So first take this one, take back, then you take on h4, the rook takes on h2, and then you go king a2. White needs to appreciate that the king situation is not in his favor. And I think king a2 here is a good move. Getting the king into the game and at the same time attacking the black pawn on b4. Actually, after rook takes h4, rook c4, this pawn becomes really difficult to defend. Yeah. So maybe this position still is better for white. I really don't think Magnus is going to win this. No, wait. The players have agreed to a draw. Rook d2, Anand goes g takes h4, and Anand has offered a draw, which was accepted. The game is over. Magnus Carlsen is not going to win the Grenke Chess Tournament because this game has ended in a draw. Magnus played a very ambitious opening, really going for it, trying to win this tournament. But in the end, he couldn't get enough. He made the imbalance, but he couldn't manage to get an attack going. Anand stayed solid, and in the end, it petered out into a fairly logical draw. Distant Fire goes, so now Fabiano only needs a draw to clinch the tournament. That is true, but at the same time, Fabiano only needed a draw to clinch the tournament in the candidates, and there he ended up winning the last game against Grischuk. And to be honest, I can see him repeating that. I think Fabiano has such a good position. He's gonna go for the win. And Vitiugo is down to 4 minutes, 4 minutes on the clock. And I think Caruana, his second tournament in a row, he's gonna go for the win where the draw would have sufficed. And I think he's gonna take it. This is a very, very nice position for black. He has the outside majority, which means he has the ability to form a passed pawn on the queen side, and at the same time he also has the bishop pair, although I will agree that this bishop on g7 is not doing a very good job, but there's potential of rerouting it long term, getting it to c5 or along this diagonal. So this g7 bishop doesn't have to be a complete disaster. And just look at this diagonal with the light squares unopposed. That bishop looks so good on c7, c6. Maybe something like rook d3. That's a possibility. Queen b7. Also a good move. No, because you need to protect this one. So maybe rook d5 followed by queen b7. And to be honest, I don't see what Vitiugov's queen is doing out here on h3. It's been standing there for a very long time, but it has never really contributed, not made any threats Fabiano had to worry about. How many moves until they get more time, asks Cormac. That's a very good question. Vitiugov has just made his 29th move. So he has another 11 moves until he gets additional time. Bishop e3, rook d3 has been played. So he has 11 more moves to make. I do believe he's getting 30 seconds extra per move. So he's going to have at least 30 seconds per move, and then plus these 5 minutes on the clock. So he's going to have an average of 1 minute per move, which is not a lot of time. When you start out the game, you normally have 3 minutes on average to make your moves. So going down to a necessity of a 1 minute average, that is time trouble. And also time trouble is enhanced when you have a bad position, because in bad positions it's more difficult to find good moves, simply because there's not as many good moves when you have a bad position. So that's also going to affect his time management. I don't have bones asks, how often do you do these commentaries? I think you're my favorite commentator now. I'm doing it reasonably often in Norwegian. But for English, I am not doing it that often. There's the Shamkir chess tournament coming up, Um, so I guess maybe I can do some English coverage then. But I was planning to do Norwegian. Very often these tournaments have their own commentaries, so I kind of feel like that doing it in Norwegian makes sense because then I'm offering something other than what the organizer's own commentary is. Black has better rooks, says Distant Fire. Yes, I agree with that, but that is not the end of the story. Black has better rooks. Black has a better bishop. Black has a better queen. To be honest, Black has a better everything, which is why I think, once again, with the black pieces, Fabiano is going to do the last round win. And that is pretty sensational. Okay, Queen H4. Queen H4 offering the exchange of queens. Now, I'm very tempted to go Bishop F8 since I want to do this Bishop F8 maneuver anyhow to get the bishop in a better position. But maybe then White can go Queen F2. Do we care about White going Queen F2? I'm not sure. If we take the queen, take back, and then go something like but then the pawn on c5 is being attacked. And if bishop f8, then knight g6 is a good move, removing the bishop. And when the bishop is removed, we're free to take the pawn on c5. Um, so I think bishop f8 makes a lot of sense. Are there other moves? I guess we could just move the queen. Queen f7, planning to go queen g6, attacking down here, then get the rook attacking here, the bishop attacking here. There's a lot of stuff converging to the g2 square. Thank you to Segiman for the 3-month resub. Perpetual Stalemate reports that Magnus says in the press conference he wasn't really comfortable with the opening. And I think that's normal. I mean, he played an unusual opening, an opening that is not held in very high regard. He was taking chances with the black pieces, trying to win this, trying to get an unbalanced position. And one of the costs of doing that is that you often have to take positions that aren't what you would normally do or what is normally recommended. So to me, Magnus not being comfortable in the opening just sounds normal. That was kind of the cost of taking the risks he was taking in that game in order to try and win the tournament. Webcam froze. Okay, so we had this happen the other time as well. So I can just remove it and put it back. The last time that worked out pretty well. Okay, that's not good. Moving the wrong thing is not good. Thank you to Chess Gamer Tag for subscribing, and thank you to Chess Gamer Tag also for gifting me the sub yesterday at the I'm actually wearing this Pro Chess League polo. So that I could spam the chess chat with the pandas emote. even though, of course, the panda emote ended up not being the decisive one, but it's so cute. Uh, and Chess Gamer Tag gifted a sub to Anna, it seems. Thank you. And I'm doing some panda emotes to keep going with my team. Even though they lost the final, they're still number one in our hearts. And Chess Gamer tagged with another gift to Alexandra. Thank you. Uh, in other news, Alexandra and I bonded over me watching Alec TV in the playing hall. So Perpetual Stalemate says that you got caught yesterday watching Alec TV play Fortnite. Yes, and among the people I got caught by was Alexandra, and she told me that she once managed 2 kills in one game, which is much better. Actually, it's twice as good as my record of having 1 kill, and it's also even better than my record in solo games, which is not ever having to to done damage to any opponents ever. My solo record is not great. But anyway, we were talking, and she suggested that we should do a duo Fortnite stream. So that might happen. I'm gonna call it hiding with Hammer, because I think that's gonna be the best bet in a two noobs playing Fortnite duo. I'm just gonna hide out. Hiding with Hammer. That'd be fun, says Chess Bay. Big activities. Avalanche says you should learn to build fortresses. Yeah, I'll look into that. My main problem is that my F1 key doesn't actually work. Because in order to use F1, I need to press something else as well as the FN button. So I think one of my main problems at the moment with Fortnite building is that my keyboard is not really suited for the way most people play the game. Uh, thank you, Chess Gamer Time, Gamer Tag. I have to run to work, but enjoy exploring the city with Anna today. Yeah, so that's a little reveal. I'm hoping to do some sightseeing uh, later today. Jeff says hiding is probably not the optimal method of getting kills. I understand. I understand. But a couple of times I've been hiding and then people walk by and I shoot them. My only problem is that I unload an entire magazine on them from 5 yards away and they still don't get hurt. My aim has to be so bad. Thank you, Chess Gamer Tag, for the subs, and I'll see you another time. Cormac says hiding may not be the most exciting tactic for streaming. Yeah, I understand. I understand. We'll see what happens. Uh, G, good job, Bob, is saying you can change your function key behavior. Okay, that's very interesting. So when I have this thing that I need to press F1, no, FN, and then F1, because it's blue thingy. I can change it so that it goes the other way. Okay, I'm gonna look into that. I'm gonna look into that. Avalanche, you should use shotguns. Yeah, I have come to understand that. I've been watching quite a bit of Alec, and I have come to the realization that in close quarter combat, you need to use the shotgun. New moves. Yes. Let's look at the new moves because Vityugov is down to 1 minute on the clock. So Rook A8, Queen H4. Fabiano decides to take this one. Interesting. Takes, takes, and now he's got to do something about this pawn, and that something cannot be the bishop going back to F8, because then knight G6 is going to be an issue removing that bishop. So instead, Fabiano has gone C4, which is a committal move because now he doesn't have that option of creating the passed pawn on the B file. So that's a big decision from him. And Vityugov has played King F2. So I'm assuming that Fabiano's plan is to go Rook A3, going after this pawn on C3. And if Bishop D4, then B4 is a very good move. Very good move, overloading the bishop so that you're free to move the pawn up the board. So you do get your passed pawn after all. This is looking so good for Fabiano. King F2, I'm expecting to see Rook A3 on the board. Evaluation is saying King F2 is a mistake, says Tom Andy. Okay, I think it was a very difficult situation for Vityugov anyhow, but I certainly agree that this position looks so good for Fabiano. Yeah, it looks really good. I'm actually surprised that Fabiano is taking so much time. Because Rook A3 looks like such an obvious move. And his opponent, only with a minute left on the clock, it makes some sense going for the using the time to put pressure. I don't have bones agrees that Black's position looks pretty tasty here. Yeah, I'm gonna say I agree with that. This looks very good for Black. How often does Hammer stream? Asks Sicilianisms. That's gonna make me post my Twitch schedule. GMJLH/events. That's gonna be the complete schedule of Hammer streams. And to be honest with you, for April, it's pretty packed. There's going to be lots of streams in April. Distant Fire, the schedule is below the stream too. Not if Sicilianism is watching from Chess TV. So if not all viewers have the schedule below the stream. Nikhil says, fix your glasses. Yeah, I gotta do something about that. But for the moment, they're doing what they're supposed to, helping me see the world a little bit sharper. King f2, Caruana goes bishop f8. Wow, that's interesting. Bishop f8. So I guess he's going for bishop a3. Um, I'm not sure whether that's really helpful. Um, is he threatening rook takes e3? That would be pretty sick. Rook takes e3. No, I don't see that being a threat. What else is going on? Can he play rook a3 later? The thing now is that whenever you go rook a3, then knight g6 is going to be a pretty good move. But on the other hand, even having the opposite colored bishops, as long as black gets two passed pawns on the queen side, you can probably win even with opposite colored bishops. Okay, so bishop f8, Hugo goes knight f3. That's a logical move. Getting ready to put that knight on d4. I don't know. I'm not sure about this bishop f8 move. It feels a bit slow. The white pieces are kind of coming back to their defensive positions. And I don't see the follow-up. I don't see Caruana's plan in this position. But Hugo is down to the increments. So Hugo is down to 40 seconds, which essentially means for the rest of the game, for the rest of until the time control. So for the next 6 moves, he's gonna have just 30 seconds to make his move. Nothing more, nothing less. He's gonna get that 30-second increment, and that's the only thinking time he's gonna have. Okay, Fabiano goes bishop d5. Okay, so this is his plan. He's putting the bishop on d5, where it defends both on c4 and on e6. And then he's just going to play, well, he wants to play b3, but probably he's just going to play b4, supported by this bishop, getting that bishop back into play, and making the c pawn a passed pawn. So to me, it really looked like he could have gotten the situation where he won the pawn on c3, but instead he's going for piece activity. So he's going to play b4, no winning a pawn, but activating the black squared bishop very well. Red move by Caruana, says Tom Andy. Red move. Okay, that's not good. Red move. That means not very good move. But on the other hand, he's still much better. It does feel like he lost the thread, but he's still much better. He is going to win this tournament. I really don't see him losing this position. Thank you to Distant Fire helping out Exterminator with how to study to improve in chess. Perpetual Stalemate says that Stockfish evaluates this as much better for black. V Miles is unhappy about Fabiano when he gets a good position. He tends to play passive when he gets a strong lead, and it's aggravating, he says. Stockfish says bishop takes f3 is winning. Uh, okay. Okay, I didn't even consider that, but when you mention it, that looks pretty good. But I did not consider that. Ooh, that's very cool. Bishop takes, g takes. Does this work? Rook takes e3? It would be so cool if it worked. King takes, rook a2. Yeah, I don't know if this works, but this is a very cool line. Threatening bishop c5 checkmate. I'm going to say probably it doesn't work because of king d4. But it's a very cool line regardless. Okay, we're going to go back into the game. Bishop d5 was played. Bishop knight d4. And now bishop c5. Now, but what about knight takes f5? What is going on in this game? Knight takes f5. What happens then? I don't know. I have no idea. This has become so complicated. So many different lines to calculate. And Vityugov is sitting there with just 30 seconds left. I think he's going to have to take on f5. I think otherwise then b4 is coming and it's very bad news. Bishop c5. Yes, knight takes f5. Knight takes f5 has been played. Fabiano very quick with playing bishop a3. Okay, you would think that winning this exchange was not all that. Because white is getting so many pawns. But I think the main thing is about that Fabiano wants to attack along the second rank, and then he needs to remove one of the white rooks in order to achieve that. Okay, so bishop c5, knight takes f5, bishop a3, knight takes h6, check, king to g7, threatens the knight. The knight has to go back, then you take the rook, then you take the rook with the bishop, and then you play rook a2, coming on the a file. Two rooks in very good positions for black. He doesn't really care about these kingside pawns. He's got other stuff on his mind. f5, f5. Good move. I don't know. Rook takes e3. Rook takes e3 feels like a good move. Rook takes e3 is going to be a piece up for black. Maybe bishop takes c1 is also good. Bishop takes c1 and then play rook a2. There's two more moves to the time control. So Vityugov has to play two more moves. Caruana has to play three more moves. So they're going to make the time control, but stuff happened in the meantime. And this is going to be decided reasonably quickly. And I think Fabiano is going to win it. But how do you decide between bishop takes c1 and rook takes e3? Both moves look very good. Both moves look so good. How do you decide? I guess you go rook takes e3 because having a piece up is better than being an exchange up. Normally. I'm not sure this is one of those situations, but just judging from what's normal, he's going to take the bishop. But actually, in this case, I think bishop takes c1 might be even better, because then you get the pawn on c3, and getting that pawn on c3 is going to be so huge in terms of getting two connected passed pawns on the queen side. And he goes for it. Fabiano turns down the piece by going, he could have gotten by going rook takes e3, and instead he takes on c1, bishop takes back on c1, and now he's free to take the pawn on c3. He can also play rook a2. The only thing he has to be careful about is this king and the pawn trying to become a new queen. Probability distribution. Did Magnus win? No. So it's exceedingly likely that Fabiano is going to win this tournament. Magnus was not the only one who could catch him. The other guy is Vityugov. So that means as long as Fabiano secures a draw in this position, then he's going to be the winner of Grenke Chess. And right now it's looking as if a draw is not enough. Fabiano is going for the win. Rook takes c3. That's a good move. Two passed pawns on the queen side. He's also an exchange up, and there's some threats coming with rook a2. So rook takes, and now f6 check. f6 check. Fabiano is going to play king to g6. And then I think this is pretty much over. Pretty much over with the two passed pawns. But this was move 40. This was move 40, so Vityugov was just handed another 50 minutes on the clock. I'm going to give them another 15-20 minutes to decide this game. But Fabiano is going to win. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. I just don't know how long it's going to take him to win. So I'm going to stream for another 15 minutes. And basically, regardless of whether it's decided by then or not, Fabiano is going to win this. Fabiano is going to win the Grenke Chess Classic. And he's going to win his second tournament in a row with only 2 or 3 days break between the tournaments. That is very impressive. Perpetual Stalemate says if the bishop doesn't move, then Fabi can take on c1 and h6. Yes, that is correct. So king g6 threatens rook takes c1. It threatens rook to a2. It threatens so many bad things that I believe Vityugov will have to resign the game. I guess he's going to play bishop f4 to kind of keep stuff going. But then b4 is a good move. b4, h4, b3, g4, b2. Something like this I think is going to happen. And maybe this situation where white has 3 passed pawns creating checkmating problems toward the black king. Actually, this might be good for white. Of course, other than this winning the bishop instantly. Yeah, I don't, even in a fantasy world, I don't really see a variation in which Vityugov is going to save this game. So king g6 from Caruana. I don't know how long Vityugov is going to think for this move. No, he's not going to think. He's going to resign. Vityugov has resigned. Caruana is the Grenke champion. And he wins in convincing style, a full point ahead of world champion Magnus Carlsen. Okay, very good. Very good game from Caruana. Uh, and that Petrov of his is taking victims left, right, and center. So in the final round of the candidates, uh, Caruana played the Petrov and managed to win with black against Grishchuk. And now he plays the very same opening, the very same line against Nikita Vityugov. And he's successful yet again with the black pieces, and he wins the Grenke Chess Tournament. Great tournament, says Cormac Bear. You make the checkout, says Barman. Yes, I'm gonna have plenty of time to check out. I might even have some breakfast. V Miles is going with the Snickers bars. Oh no, it says hype. That's funny. Perpetual Stalemate says, "Ah, so the Petrov kills all the Russians." And that's very funny because the Petrov opening is also known as the Russian game. So yeah, the Russian game is killing the Russians. First Grishchuk and now Vityugov. Groger says that Fabiano is now number 2 in the live ratings. Very well done for him. "21 ELO points behind Magnus." That is pretty good. That is pretty good. Fabiano closing in. I guess he was 50 points behind not a very long time ago, so that's very impressive from Fabiano. Isolda, here Hammer, have a Snickers. Hammer time. Every time someone says hammer time in the chat, I'm gonna want to do a couple of these. My favorite emote. Okay, I think that's gonna be it from me. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for your patience as I experiment a little bit with having the stream while traveling. I also experimented yesterday with trying to do a stream from my cell phone. That did not work out very well, I guess is the short story. Um, yeah, that's going to be it. Fabi has had an impressive year, says Cormac. Yeah, and it's not over yet. If he manages to win the World Championship match, that's going to be so, so huge. Thank you to everyone for watching. Uh, GJ Bod is looking forward to Hiding with Hammer featuring Alexandra. Yeah, we're gonna make that happen. Uh, that's it from me. I'm going back to Norway. My San Francisco adventure is over. I'm gonna be back in Norway. I'm gonna do a blindfold stream on Friday, and then I'm gonna be back to my normal setup, which is actually gonna be a relief. Even though actually this time the laptop has been cooperating very nicely. So next stream Friday at, I don't remember the time, but do check the schedule. I'm gonna link to it as well. Bye everyone.